She laughed at my empty pockets while champagne dripped from her glass. That's the first image burned into my skull, the sound of her laughter, sharp and ringing against the marble walls of her father's mansion, slicing me open in front of 50 people who belonged in a world I'd only seen from the outside. The chandelier light caught her sequin dress as she leaned back in her chair, the kind of effortless queen at her own birthday gala, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women dripping in diamonds. And me, in my off-the-rack navy blazer, gripping a glass of cheap beer because I couldn't stomach the price tag on the vintage champagne. The joke was casual, disguised as banter, but every guest caught it. She raised her glass, tilting it toward me, and announced, "Don't worry, he's here for moral support. My man's pockets are emptier than this bottle will be in 10 minutes. The room burst into polite, cruel laughter, each note echoing inside my chest. I felt my face flush. I smiled because that's what she expected me to do. In that instant, I wasn't her boyfriend. I was her punchline. I told myself not to overreact. After all, she had a way of teasing that was supposed to be playful, wasn't it? That's what I believed, what I'd wanted to believe. She was born into money, raised in a palace of excess. I came from a family that measured dinner by what was left after rent. She collected memories in Paris, I collected pay stubs and second-hand books. Of course there was a divide. But I thought love bridged it. I thought I was more than my balance sheet. Still, that night made the distance unignorable. I watched how she moved through her guests, champagne flute never empty, laughter spilling out in a steady rhythm. Her hand lingered too long on the arm of her ex, a hedge fund golden boy who wore arrogance like cologne. She whispered something close to his ear, then turned her head so her hair brushed his cheek. My chest tightened. When she came back to me, her lipstick was smudged slightly at the corner. I pretended not to notice. It wasn't just the flirting, it was the way she looked at me like I was some quaint addition to her curated life. Like I was a story she told her friends for amusement. See? I'm not shallow. I date a normal guy. Throughout the night, I caught fragments of her subtle disdain. The way she wrinkled her nose when I mentioned my job. The way her eyes darted to the waiter when I tipped him a few crumpled bills instead of sliding a card. The way her smile froze when someone asked me about my plans, and I spoke of ambition rather than inheritance. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was imagining it. But something gnawed at me, an unease I couldn't swallow with the bitter taste of cheap beer. Later, when the music swelled and her guests drifted into little clusters of gossip and cigarettes, I slipped into the hallway for air. The scent of roses and expensive perfume clung to the walls. That's when I heard her voice. She was around the corner, speaking low but not low enough. I froze. "I'm just keeping him around until someone better comes along," she whispered to her friend, her tone casual, amused, like she was discussing shoes or wine, not me. The words didn't cut it. They detonated. My body went cold. My throat tightened, my palms clenched. Every laugh, every smirk, every dismissive glance of the night collapsed into that single sentence. My love for her wasn't love at all, it was entertainment. My devotion was her accessory. I wanted to walk away, to storm out, to confront her. Instead, I stood there, invisible, listening as her friend giggled and clinked a glass against hers. Was I just her charity case, or her joke? I didn't grow up in a house that held secrets, it held silence. Silence and debt. My father's boots were always caked in dust from construction sites, his hands raw from labor that never earned him more than survival wages. My mother worked night shifts at the diner, coming home with her apron smelling of grease and burnt coffee. We didn't talk about dreams. Dreams were luxuries for people who could afford time to fantasize. In my house, we talked about bills. About overdue notices. About stretching dinner into tomorrow. I learned early how to measure myself against money. I'd watch kids at school unwrap new sneakers while I scrubbed mine to keep the soles white. My notebooks were always from the discount aisle, the edges already bent before I ever wrote a word. Those little humiliations stuck to me like invisible stains. I carried them, no matter how clean I tried to present myself. Ambition became my rebellion. I swore I'd never be trapped like my parents, counting pennies, drowning in silence. I worked through college, bartending, cleaning offices at dawn, trading sleep for tuition. I graduated with a degree, but more importantly, with a fire in my chest. I wouldn't just survive. I'd climb. Even if every rung of the ladder tore at my hands, I would climb. And then came her. I met her at a charity gala where I wasn't even supposed to be. I was filling in for my boss, a last-minute seat filler among the glittering elite. She walked in draped in a silver dress that made the room fall into orbit around her. Her laugh was like a secret whispered across a crowded room. When she turned her eyes on me, I felt chosen. She was wealthy, yes, but it was more than that. She carried wealth like it was her natural skin, effortless, inevitable. She didn't worry about bills or bargain sales, her concerns were exotic vacations and whether a driver was late. To me, that kind of life was intoxicating. She was proof that the world I'd clawed toward wasn't a mirage. At first, she was magnetic. She called me grounded. Said I wasn't like the men she usually dated, men who thought money was personality. She told me she liked my scrappiness, the way I'd earned every inch of myself instead of inheriting it. I believed her. I thought maybe I was her escape from her gilded cage. But slowly, the sweetness soured. She began treating me like a project. A pet she could groom. She'd buy me shirts I couldn't afford, then smirk when I wore my old jacket instead. She'd hold up a wine glass and say, "You have so much to learn about the good stuff," swirling the red liquid like it contained secrets I wasn't privy to. Every time she corrected me, mocked me, teased me in front of her friends, I laughed it off. I told myself it was playful. I told myself she didn't mean harm. But beneath her laughter was something sharper, something cold. That's when the symbols began to haunt me. The wine glass became her weapon, always in her hand when she cut me down with a smile. A reminder of indulgence I didn't belong to. The torn pay stub in my wallet, crumpled from years of carrying proof that no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. Every time I touched it, my chest tightened with the reminder of what I lacked. And the mirror, I'd catch myself in reflections at her parties, surrounded by crystal and chandeliers, and I didn't see myself. I saw cracks. I saw a man split in two, the self-made professional I wanted to be, and the insecure boy who never stopped counting coins. The foreshadowing was there, but I refused to read it. She'd cancel dinners with vague excuses. She'd smile at me with lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes, while we were lying together, she'd smirk at something unseen, a thought she never shared. I convinced myself it was stress, or that she just needed space. I ignored the way her touch felt like performance instead of affection. I told myself I was paranoid. That's what insecurity does, it makes you second-guess what your gut screams. But the truth was waiting for me in digital shadows. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I never touched her things, I knew how much she valued privacy, or maybe just control. But this time, something in me reached out before I could think. I opened Instagram. And there it was. Her secret account. A Finsta filled with posts not meant for public eyes. Photos of me at dinners, at her parties, in my second-hand blazer. Captions dripping with cruel humor, cheap date vibes. He tips like a high schooler. Project pockets. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. Each image was a knife, each word a twist. She hadn't just mocked me in private whispers, she'd broadcasted me as her joke, her charity case, her entertainment. I sat there staring at the screen, bile rising in my throat. The woman I thought I loved wasn't my partner. She was my predator. The shower turned off. I locked the phone and set it back before she emerged, steam curling around her perfect silhouette. She smiled at me, wrapped in a towel, as if nothing in the world was wrong. But I knew. I knew everything. And that knowledge was the beginning of my undoing, or my revenge. The Finsta should have been enough. Enough proof to walk away. Enough humiliation to sever whatever fragile thread bound me to her. But walking away felt like losing more than her, it felt like losing the life I'd clawed toward, the dream of escaping my origins. I wasn't ready to admit that everything I believed in her was a lie. So I stayed. I stayed even when the laughter from her friends still rang in my ears. I stayed when she looked at me as if my presence at her table was an act of charity on her part. I stayed because leaving would mean facing my own emptiness, and I wasn't strong enough then. The cracks widened quickly. Her gifts became weapons. A leather wallet slipped into my hands with a smirk. Now you don't have to keep pulling out that sad old thing. A watch worth more than my monthly rent, so you'll finally look the part. Every gift came wrapped in mockery, every ribbon tied with insult. And I, like the obedient project I'd become, murmured gratitude. I felt smaller with each thank you, my words shrinking as her satisfaction grew. I began to notice her absences more sharply. Work dinners, she said. Family obligations. Yet her perfume lingered in the air long after midnight, the kind of scent that didn't cling to boardrooms or relatives. It wasn't paranoia this time. It was a pattern. One evening, while pretending to work late, I drove by her family's country club. Through the glowing windows, I saw her. Not alone. She was leaning against him, her ex, the hedge fund golden boy with arrogance stitched into his smile. His hand rested on her waist like it had never left, like I had only ever been filling the space between them. The sight hollowed me. My chest caved inward, my throat tightened until I thought I'd choke on my own breath. She tilted her head back and laughed at something he whispered. That laugh, the one she once reserved for me. Or had I only imagined it was ever mine? I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I went home and sat in the dark, the torn pay stub still folded in my wallet, the mirror in my bathroom reflecting a man unrecognizable even to himself. Fury and shame coiled in me, indistinguishable from each other. Was I angry at her for betraying me, or at myself for letting it happen? The following weeks were a theater of cruelty. She paraded me at gatherings, draping herself over me in front of her friends, whispering little barbs in my ear masked as affection. Smile more, you look so serious. You should order the lobster, don't worry, I'll cover it. Always in front of people. Always a reminder that she owned me, even if just socially. Her family amplified it. Her father barely concealed his disdain. Her mother looked through me as though I were part of the furniture. At dinner, I was invisible unless I was a punchline. What a novelty, her father once said, swirling his wine. A self-made man at this table. Almost romantic. I wanted to sink through the floor. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was engineered. Every glance, every comment, every smirk from her circle was orchestrated by her. I was entertainment, the loyal outsider paraded for her amusement. The final blade came not from her lips, but from a document. One night, while she showered, I opened her laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that the unease inside me demanded answers. Emails cluttered the screen. Contracts, attachments, legal jargon I barely understood. But one thing stood out, my name. There it was, printed across forms tied to an offshore account. My details, my social security number, my employment information, used as a signature front for one of her family's shady ventures. They hadn't just mocked me. They had weaponized me. My stomach lurched as I scrolled through page after page. Investments funneled through my identity. Shell companies tied to me, without my knowledge. If anything went wrong, if the law came crashing down, I would be the face of it. Disposable. Expendable. My hands trembled so violently I could barely keep the cursor steady. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. She hadn't simply betrayed me emotionally, she had tethered me to her corruption, treating me as a shield, a puppet with just enough dignity to destroy. When she stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in steam and silk, I shut the laptop before she saw my expression. She smiled, oblivious, asking if I wanted wine. I nodded, silent. My throat burned with words I couldn't yet release. Inside, though, something snapped. I realized then that I was no longer just her joke. I was her cover. Her pawn. Her liability is waiting to be discarded. And pawns, when pushed too far, become something else. I wasn't planning to escape anymore. I was planning war. Grief is a loud thing at first. Betrayal howls in your chest, rattles your ribs, keeps you awake with its teeth buried deep. But after a while, it quiets. The silence it leaves behind is sharper than the scream. That silence became my weapon. I stopped loving her the night I discovered my name forged across her family's dirty contracts. But I didn't storm out. I didn't confront her. I smiled. I played along. Because rage without patience is useless. And patience was the only thing I still had left to give. The first step was simple, I watched. I studied her patterns the way she had studied my insecurities. The way her hand trembled slightly when her father questioned her in public. The way she laughed louder when her ex was around, as if volume could mask desperation. The way she never touched her glass of wine when she was nervous, just spun it, round and round, like she was stirring her own fear. Every weakness became a note in my private ledger. Every smirk, every careless confession, every brag in front of her friends became material. She thought she was untouchable. I knew better. But studying her wasn't enough. To destroy someone in her world, you needed to destroy the belief others had in her. That meant infiltrating the circle that once mocked me. It was easier than I expected. The wealthy are careless with loyalty. Her friends, those sleek men and jeweled women, were as hungry as wolves for attention. I learned to listen more than I spoke, to let them confess their boredom, their envy, their secrets after too many drinks. Slowly, I became the ear they whispered into. I planted doubts in careful doses. A raised eyebrow when someone mentioned her. A quiet sigh when her name came up. She's wonderful, I'd say, pausing just long enough for the shadow of something unspoken to linger. People hear what they want to hear. And in her world, where betrayal was currency, suspicion spread faster than truth. At the same time, I built my other front, the one she didn't know existed. You see, I wasn't as powerless as she believed. I'd spent years working in the shadows of finance, learning not only how to scrape by but how to invest, how to grow. Quietly, carefully, I'd built my own network, startups I'd helped fund, silent partnerships, small ventures that seemed inconsequential on their own. She never asked. She assumed I was nothing but a paycheck-to-paycheck professional, forever beneath her. That assumption was her blind spot. Her family, drunk on legacy wealth, hadn't seen me coming either. For months before the birthday humiliation, I'd been negotiating behind closed doors, aligning myself with investors her father was courting. By the time I discovered the betrayal, the ink on several contracts had already dried. Shares had shifted. Control had changed hands. They didn't know it yet, but I had been threading myself into the very empire they sat atop. I just hadn't intended to use it against her. Not until she gave me reason. Now, every move I made had a purpose. I dressed in the clothes she once mocked me for, knowing her friends would interpret it as defiance rather than poverty. I tipped waiters heavily when she wasn't looking, ensuring that whispers about my cheapness would begin to conflict with reality. I let her believe I was crumbling while I was only laying foundations. And she never noticed. One night, at another of her endless soirees, she leaned against me in front of her guests, glass of champagne in hand, her smile painted on like a mask. She laughed about my humble taste, telling them how I once mistook a Bordeaux for a Cabernet. Her friends tittered, eyes darting between us, waiting for my shame to bloom. I only smiled. I kissed her temple. I let her think she was still winning. Inside, I was already imagining the moment the mask would slip, not mine, but hers. The seeds of revenge were everywhere now. Her friends began to question her loyalty. Her father began to doubt her judgment when a deal slipped through his fingers. Because of me. And still, she looked at me with that same dismissive affection, certain I was harmless. The irony tasted sweeter than wine. Then came the night she laughed one last time. We were at her family's estate, the table crowded with executives and investors. Her father spoke proudly of an impending merger, the kind that would cement his dynasty for decades. He toasted, and she joined in, glancing at me with that familiar smirk. "You should be proud," she whispered, her tone dripping. "Maybe someday you'll understand what real power looks like." I clinked my glass against hers. The mirror on the far wall caught our reflection, her glowing with arrogance, me calm, unreadable. For the first time, I didn't see cracks. I saw clarity. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the company her father was so eager to merge with, was mine. And soon, so would be their empire. Revenge isn't fire. It isn't rage or screaming or broken glass. Revenge is ice. Silent, creeping, deliberate. Fire burns out too fast. Ice seeps in and splits the stone from within. By the time I was ready to move, my heartbreak had cooled into something sharper than grief. It was a calculation. And calculation is what she never expected from me. The opportunity came at another gala, one of those evenings drenched in chandeliers and white-gloved servers, where everyone pretended champagne was more important than blood. She was radiant as always, shimmering in a gown that cost more than I made in a month. She looped her arm through mine, her smile dazzling, her laugh rehearsed. I was her accessory again. But that night, I was also her detonator. I'd gathered evidence quietly, photos of her with her ex at the country club, text messages she thought she'd deleted but hadn't, screenshots of conversations where she called me project pockets like I was a science experiment. All packaged neatly into a single folder on a phone I accidentally left in the coatroom. Halfway through the evening, when the music swelled and her friends gathered in glittering clusters, I excused myself. I walked calmly to the bar, ordered a whiskey, and waited. It didn't take long. One of her friends found the phone. She opened it, curiosity pulling her in, and found everything. Within minutes, whispers slithered through the ballroom like smoke. I saw eyes cutting toward her, lips pressed against ears. And then the laughter, not the adoration she craved, but the cruel kind, the same sound she once used to slice me apart. She noticed. Of course she did. She clutched my arm tighter, confusion flashing in her eyes as conversations faltered around her. When her best friend finally confronted her, "Is it true? You've been cheating on him? Mocking him?" The mask cracked. Her denial was shrill. Desperate. But the evidence was already circulating in every manicured hand. Screens lit up with her betrayal. And for the first time, I watched her squirm under the gaze of her own kingdom. I didn't say a word. I just sipped my whiskey. Her father's humiliation came next. He'd been boasting for months about a merger that would solidify his empire. He strutted in boardrooms like a king preparing to add another jewel to his crown. What he didn't know was that I'd already purchased the jewel out from under him. Quietly, strategically, I'd aligned myself with investors who were tired of his arrogance. The deal was set to be announced at a high-profile conference. Cameras, reporters, executives, all gathered to witness his triumph. He strode onto the stage, his daughter in tow, ready to declare victory. That's when the twist unraveled. Instead of his name appearing on the screen as the controlling shareholder of the target company, mine did. My face. My signature. The reveal rippled through the room like a storm. Gasps, murmurs, then silence so heavy it felt like gravity doubled. His jaw tightened, his face blotched red. He stumbled through his speech, stammering excuses, trying to paint it as a strategic partnership. But everyone knew what it was: defeat. And I stood at the back of the hall, calm, invisible, watching his empire fracture in real time. She saw me then. Our eyes met across the sea of collapsing dignity. For the first time, her smirk faltered. Humiliation spreads faster than fire in her circles. By the end of the week, she was radioactive. Friends who once clung to her for status now avoided her like plague. Screenshots of her mocking me became memes in private group chats. Invitations dried up. The woman who thrived on attention now found silence where applause once lived. She tried to fight back. First came the lies, claiming her phone had been hacked, that I'd planted evidence. But her friends didn't believe her. They knew her too well, knew the cruelty in her laughter, the sharpness of her tongue. Then came the tears. She appeared at my apartment one night, mascara streaking down her face, begging me to believe her. "You're the only one who matters," she whispered, clinging to my shirt. I was stupid. I didn't mean it. "I love you." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I held her gently, whispered, "I know." Then I let her go. Because this wasn't about closure. This was about the conclusion. The final twist came when her father turned on her. His empire shaken, his pride shredded, he needed a scapegoat. And she was the perfect one. I watched him publicly criticize her judgment, distance himself from her decisions. The same father who once paraded her like a trophy now discarded her like a broken ornament. Her isolation was complete. But I wasn't finished. The gala, the documents, the whispers, those were just the groundwork. The final move wasn't exposure or sabotage. It was a revelation. The next event was smaller, more intimate. A private dinner with investors and family, the remnants of her father's power still clinging together. She was there, brittle and hollow, forcing smiles that no one returned. Her father sat rigid, his eyes dark with unspoken blame. And I sat at the same table, the poor boyfriend with empty pockets, quiet as ever. Until the moment arrived. I stood, glass in hand, and tapped it gently. The room stilled. All eyes on me. I met hers, her smirk gone now, replaced with dread. "You once told me I'd never understand real power," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Maybe you were right. But tonight, you'll see just how well I've learned." And then I revealed it, the truth they'd all missed, the mask I'd worn so carefully. I wasn't just her charity case. I wasn't the poor man at her table. I was the controlling shareholder of the empire her family relied upon. The silence that followed was deafening. And her face, the horror in her eyes, was worth every second of the years she'd stolen from me. But this was only the beginning of the final act. The room froze when I spoke the truth. I watched it spread across their faces, first confusion, then shock, then the realization that the poor man they mocked, the accessory at their table, had been holding the strings all along. Her father's jaw clenched so tight the vein in his temple bulged. The investors looked at one another, whispering in disbelief. And her, she didn't move at first. She sat there, wine glass trembling in her hand, staring at me as if she'd never seen me before. Because she hadn't. She never looked past the torn pay stub, the second-hand blazer, the cheap beer in my hand. She never saw the man who spent sleepless years carving himself into something more. She mocked the surface and missed the foundation. And now, the foundation was hers no longer. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than her laughter had ever been. That night was the culmination of everything she had taught me, the cruelty of indulgence, the weight of humiliation, the fragility of power. For months, I carried those lessons like stones in my chest. But in unmasking myself, I set them down. And in their place, there was only clarity. I looked into the mirror later, in the hotel room where the city lights bled through the curtains. For the first time, I didn't see cracks. The face staring back was whole, but not unscarred. The lines of hurt were etched too deep to ever vanish, but they had hardened into something else, resolve. The mirror didn't mock me anymore. It acknowledged me. On the desk beside me, a wine glass sat half full. The same symbol of her indulgence, her arrogance, her weapon. I picked it up, felt its fragile stem between my fingers, and drained it in one motion. Empty at last. It didn't taste sweet. It tasted final. She came to me days later. Not with laughter, not with cruelty, but with desperation. Her empire was crumbling, her father had cut her off, and her circle of friends had abandoned her. She wanted forgiveness, or maybe she just wanted rescue. She stood in my doorway, tears streaking her face, whispering my name like it still carried tenderness. But I had none left to give. Because I finally understood, I had never been loved. Not for myself. Not for the boy who scrubbed his sneakers to keep them white, or the man who clawed his way out of silence. I had been tolerated, mocked, used. And love without respect is just a prettier form of cruelty. So I let her cry. I let her plead. And when her voice broke into silence, I closed the door. That was the real revenge, not the humiliation, not the empire, not the power. It was the emptiness I left her with. The void where my devotion used to be. I turned back to the mirror one last time, adjusted the cuffs of the tailored shirt I'd bought myself, not gifted by her hand. She taught me to hate my empty pockets, so I filled them with her silence. And that silence was mine to keep.